Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here is your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Well, again, thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning here at Faith in Our Hometown. We're glad that you decided to spend part of your Sunday morning with us. I hope that some of you saw the beginning of this conversation last week here at Faith in Our Hometown. My guest, Krista Stark, who's the Executive Director of the Southwest Missouri Democrats. Krista was here, and last week we began to start talking a little bit about the legislation that was passed. We were talking about the fact that in some ways, there's a lot of disagreement about the legislation anyway. And so we're going to bring up the bill a little bit tonight, or this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means and where it might be headed. And, and again, we'll try to form maybe some common ground of maybe if it's not this bill or this particular way, how can we hit some common ground together? So we're going to be right back to continue that conversation with Krista right after this Mercy Minute. Grab your cup of coffee and settle in, and hopefully you're here for round two.
Blessings and greetings of mercy to you. My name is Anna Nichols. I am a Sister of Mercy and currently the leader of Heritage and Spirituality at Mercy International Association. I love the fact that sisters throughout time have gone where they have been called to go, and they have often picked up ministries that they never intended to pick up. 25 years ago, there were 22,000 Sisters of Mercy globally. Today we're down to about 6,200 with Sister Rock and some of the others. But despite the fact there are 6,500 or 6,200 sisters left, there is an amazing number of women and men of mercy who are working alongside us, and that continues to expand and expand, and for me that is incredibly exciting. So as far as National Catholic Sisters Week, I really look at the legacy that they have passed on and the fact that so many women, men, young people are living mercy today. That really is for me what's significant.
Well, Krista, thank you again for being here. We're halfway through a conversation. And so we were talking a little bit at the end of the last show about the difficulties in some ways with a bill that kind of like draws this line in the sand. And no matter where we draw the line in the sand, nobody's going to be happy. I don't think. True. That's what I think. No matter where we draw the line in the sand, nobody's going to be happy. But let's talk a little bit about the bill specifically, and then we'll talk a little bit about maybe where we can find some common ground. If this isn't the right way or the right approach, what can we do? What might we do? And we talked a little bit the last time again about some other things that we think might be a better approach. Right. Perhaps rather than just maybe this particular law at this particular point in time. Again, in your opinion, and of course I've hedged that a little bit, but that's okay.
So this particular bill, we of course are calling it extreme because it is very, very cut and dried in a lot of ways.
It draws a line.
It does. It makes abortions illegal at an 8-week mark. At just when you can sense the electrical impulse of heartbeat before the heart is even really fully formed, but just has the electrical impulse. One of the reasons that we say that that's extreme is because many women don't even know they are pregnant until roughly that time. So for many women, this would entirely cut off that option or that choice for them. It's very common in our area here in Southwest Missouri for doctors to tell you that they don't want to see you for your first appointment until you're 7 weeks pregnant. So that would leave about a week for a choice that we also have a law that requires a 72-hour waiting period in Missouri. So that's tightening that window quite a bit.
4 days.
It also does not have any exemptions for rape, incest, victims of sex trafficking, or health of the mother. It also does not have exemptions, or at least not very clear-cut exemptions for babies that are deemed by doctors to not really be compatible with life later on in pregnancy. And it puts some very stiff penalties on the doctors so that if they're trying to make that decision, they're probably going to err on the side of not doing so.
Yeah, and again, I don't even that whole language of I mean, it just kind of gets me on the inside when we start talking about, how can in some ways a baby not be compatible with life?
Well, I'll tell you a story that I was told tonight, and I did ask her permission if
sure.
I could talk about this story. We have a local mother who had a baby with a fetal anomaly that it didn't have bones. So that's, you can't live outside the womb without bones.
Yeah.
And her concern was also that her fetus at that point was experiencing pain in utero because of the pressure. Obviously, it was going to have to be a cesarean section because traditional birth was not going to be an option for this particular family. And at that time, even with the laws as they were, their insurance company deemed to not pay for an early cesarean because they called that an abortive measure at that point in the pregnancy. And so she now has a medical bill that she's going to be paying off for the rest of her life, possibly, potentially, for very expensive procedures and complications because she had to make this choice to pay for this on her own. And this was before this bill passed. So, this bill just really even tightens up our system to the point where parents would probably not even be allowed to make the choice that she made, which was I'll foot the bill myself without my insurance that I've been paying for covering it. But that was a horrible situation for that family, and it was a wanted child. And so you're going to have those instances inside this bill. You're also going to have instances of a woman that's been raped or is a victim of incest that is not able to have a full range of reproductive health care decisions anymore for herself and her body because we've passed an 8-week heartbeat bill. So, we're calling it extreme for a wide range of reasons, and much of it is it doesn't have those exemptions, and it draws a delineated line at a point where many women don't really know they're pregnant yet until almost this point.
Yeah. And again, my whole thing, even with, I can be understanding. I can understand why people would feel like they're in desperate situations. I just want to be in the situation where we offer some of those people whatever assistance they need. But I still, again, somebody did something horrible to somebody else. Somebody devalued someone else's life enough to where they said, I'm gonna, your life isn't worth anything to me, so I can treat you however I want. I can rape you, I can do whatever. Yeah. And that's wrong.
Yes,
wrong.
Of course.
Just
we can all agree
wrong.
on that part. That's a travesty.
Wrong. But again, how do I not still fight for that little life? Because again, I don't want that life being devalued. I mean, and again, and I've got compassion for it. But again, when you are in some ways saying, well, is it a human life? Is it not a human life?
I'm like, last week about about totality of life and how women are saying, and people with uteruses are saying, we want our life to be part of this conversation and discussion, and it certainly should be. And about the fact that privacy in medical procedures is kind of the overriding law of our land, except in this instance where we tend to want to make these restrictions that come between that, and we seem to be doing it from a religious basis of a particular set of religions, whereas we have a whole bunch of spiritualities and religions in our country, and we tend to not make laws based on that, and constitutionally have not traditionally made laws based on religion because we don't want to impose one particular religion. Right,
but I still think you bring your best game to that, and rational moral arguments, I will still say the only thing that a fetus lacks is growth and development before it becomes a person, just like everybody else. And if we start making growth and development the criteria for whether a person is worth anything or not, or whether I can terminate that, then I can get rid of you because I don't like the way you've grown or developed.
And I think that's a commonality that we could all agree with. Like we don't want it to be something that comes to that point.
Right.
And so I feel like when we're talking about legislation and the fact that this legislation has passed, and that we have this commonality of wanting to value humans, that what we really need to talk about in some ways is legislation that needs to be passed that does that
Oh,
first before we assess this issue. So that was
Right.
one of the criticisms, was
Yeah,
that
yeah.
this bill was passed.
Well, we should have done a few things along with
Well,
it.
others were not. And so, that's the argument kind of from my party's standpoint.
And I'm
is-
probably going to agree with you
yeah,
wholeheartedly here.
Is,
'Cause,
we did not assess, how are we going to feed the child after
Right.
it's born?
I got it.
We're not assessing that very well in Missouri. In fact, we're cutting things like SNAP and TANF in the state of Missouri because of budgetary issues. We have not assessed how can we have a better network to address bringing down the instance of unintended pregnancies. If you bring down the instance of unintended pregnancies,
Yep.
then it's going to meet. But what is really both of our goal?
Yeah.
We don't want to see women have to pursue an abortion any
No.
more than you do in a lot of
Exactly.
ways, because from the woman's perspective, that's an extreme medical procedure that we would like to try to avoid.
Well, and I wind up
So-
dealing with a lot of those folks in the aftermath because they felt like they didn't have any other options at the time.
And we don't have
And then
good
have to go back and try to help to heal that later on because they feel
Right.
horrible.
We don't have good preventative measures in Missouri. We do
Mm-hmm.
not have good measures that make, we didn't expand to Medicaid, so we don't have that safety net for birth control in
We're
Missouri.
going to do another show on that too, by
Yeah.
the way, but go
we,
ahead.
We also do not provide comprehensive science-based sex education in Missouri, and which is something that brings down the incidence of unintended pregnancies. And we had Republican and Democrat women legislators that tried to pass things last session, like 13-month prescriptions for birth control, so that your one appointment that you get on Medicaid or on some other types of insurance would get your prescription for the whole year. And that languished in committee because the same caucus that insisted on passing this bill that we think is extreme stopped that bill, even though it came from their own party. The sponsors were Republicans.
Yeah.
Republican female legislators that we tried to reach out across the aisle and work with, and they were upset too about the fact that that bill was stopped, because they agree that we can find commonality there. We can find commonality on on two ends of the spectrum. We may always disagree about the pro-choice, pro-life argument, although we're showing that we can still talk about it.
Well, and
We can
that's
still
what
converse
I
about
want
it.
to do. I want to do something.
Yeah.
And again, we're
But
going
we
to have.
we can agree on many of the things before an unintended pregnancy happens, and many of the things after a child is born. So I would love to see the two parties and the two sides come together to address those issues instead of just always targeting to this one very hot button issue that you and I are talking about, because it's so complicated that it's taken 2 episodes of your show for us to talk about it.
Well, and I just think that we've got to be talking about it a little bit more, which is one of the reasons why I'm willing to give 2 episodes
Right.
to it, because right now the conversation just keeps dropping dead, because it's just like, well, I disagree with you and I disagree with you, and we're
Right.
going to turn our backs on
Yes.
each other and walk away.
Well, and we don't
And
even,
that's not
when we
good.
just are arguing about this one thing, we don't very functionally come together on those other 2 ends either, of how
Right.
do we prevent unintended pregnancies, and then how are we compassionate to parents and to mothers.
Well, let's talk a little bit, maybe some of that common ground in our last segment, which is going to come right up
Okay.
just here in a second. We're going to be right back after this quick break, so don't go away, and we're going to come back to talk a little bit about common ground and how we can hold it.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, again, my guest, Krista Stark, Executive Director of the Southwest Missouri Democrats, and again, an impassioned conversation this morning, about these things. We left at the break about saying, well, let's talk a little bit about, common ground. And one of the things that we talked about on the thing is, I will agree with you, one of the comments that you made in the break is it's like we don't often respect motherhood and try to figure out how to support it. And I agree with that. I will tell you, some of the things that we do, here in southern Missouri, we have an entire house set apart where we will help women who do not want to terminate pregnancy but need support in some way, shape, or form or another.
Great.
And so we can help take care of that. I know that Life Choices here in our own area, tries to make sure that we will do what we can to support women in their and families. If women, men, if they suddenly have a pregnancy, and especially if it's an unplanned one, How do we give them the support that they need in order to make sure that they can
Yes.
be supported in that? Now,
And-
what can we
and
do
from,
on the state
and
level?
From the other side, like, Planned Parenthood also offers prenatal services to women that want to retain their pregnancy, but don't have good health care options because of not having insurance.
Right.
So that's one way that the
And
two
again,
sides of the aisle could come together on this
And
this
especially in terms of this, I'm going to say this, especially in terms of the education and some of those kinds of things, I'm not out to demonize Planned Parenthood, but
Right.
I also think that in their own right, Planned Parenthood has in some ways become, their business model has become too reliant upon, performing a lot of abortions.
Well, I mean, ours here doesn't even
Right.
perform abortive
Ours here.
services.
Well, it's one of the reasons why it's in
And-
some ways so much easier for us, or for even, some of the times the life choices to work with Planned Parenthood on some of those things because we're coming down in the same area,
Because
coming to
there
the same
are
conclusions.
commonalities. on
There are
prevent-
commonalities.
And there are things we could do legislatively.
And we got to
So-
again keep painting. I don't want to paint Planned Parenthood here with that same brush because
So-
I know they're not into
Right.
the same
So
thing.
legislatively, like, one of the things that I think could be picked back up in the next session, and that I hope all of our constituents could agree on, or at least many, is that legislation I talked about that was worked across the aisle. And there were multiple pieces of legislation. Some of them dealt with birth control and making birth control more affordable and accessible and easier to get through insurance in the state of Missouri. One of them was a 13-month script for birth control so that you didn't have to go back to your doctor multiple times in a year because your insurance doesn't pay for you to go to that particular doctor multiple times. And then another one dealt with postpartum services and a screening for postpartum depression.
Right.
A lot of women don't go back to their doctor. Their insurance, if they have Medicaid, their insurance cuts off at the 6-week mark. So they're not going back to that particular doctor. They don't have the same coverage, or some women just, can't afford the copay. So this bill would have allowed women to be assessed for postpartum depression at their pediatric center, where they take their child for a doctor's visit, because you're going to take your kid, to be assessed, and mothers are good about that. Amending themselves for support of their child. And so it would have allowed postpartum depression screenings at the pediatrician. And that's a bill that I think is important to show respect of motherhood, because I think we need to respect motherhood, and we need to respect mothers to make parenting decisions all the way through. And while we may not agree on that parenting decision that is involved in this particular part of reproductive health services, we certainly, I think, can find commonality across the aisle and legislate together on things that come before and things that come after. I hope to see that in the next session.
Yeah, again, what areas we can cooperate on. I'll go back to, and this one's going to get very sticky for me, okay? Because the way that many times the church has come down on the issue of birth control.
And I understand birth control is a stickier issue for you.
It's a stickier for us, because
For
again, we don't
Catholics.
necessarily want a lot of tax dollars going to do something that we just don't think people ought to be doing anyway. Okay, fine. But I'm going to say this, and I'll go out on the limb here to say this.
Okay.
How we do that, I would still rather. There are a lot of people out there who are going to disagree with me on the issue of birth control. And I understand. I've been in campus ministry now for 26 years, so you can imagine, okay?
Yes.
I always had students who sometimes would just say, okay, I disagree with you on this, and I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to, be on the pill and all this stuff anyway, all that kind of, okay, fine. I would still rather see that happen than people using abortion as a type of birth control, because to me, they're two categorically different issues there.
My feeling and our organizational feeling is that women are not trying to do that and don't want to do that. That sometimes women are put in a position of doing it because we are not providing other things that could reduce unintended pregnancies. Now, you're always going to have birth control failures. You're always going to have wanted children that something goes wrong with the pregnancy. You're always going to have these things that maybe can't make the rate of abortion 0.
Yeah.
But we can certainly come together to bring it down, and we certainly want to do that. And there were a lot of Republican female legislators that wanted to try to do it too.
Well, and I'm just saying, from my vantage point with the young women, again, the onus is on us as well to make our case better to people as to why we think life begins at conception. I want to say that I think we need to be doing that better, rather than looking for this or that other legal thing to solve our moral issue. I think that we need to be taking the moral issue to people much more effectively, in our day and age,
Right.
and speaking a language that people can understand, I'll take some of the blame for that, because I just don't think we're doing a very good job with that.
And that's what our constituents that have very strongly held personal faith-based beliefs have come to us and said. They don't like the bill because that's something they're legislating to, and we don't believe that you should legislate from a personal religious perspective. However, everybody has their own personally held belief and can facilitate to that problem in different ways. But the bill and the legislation itself is sort of imposing one particular spiritual viewpoint on all Missourians with a uterus.
Well, yeah, and again, but my problem is that if I don't do that, I'm taking all the little ones that have, uteruses that are still yet to develop, and the other half the human race too, and still saying, well, you're not as worth as much and you're vulnerable. Because again, all this was about, remember us sticking up for the little ones when we started our conversation 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
Sticking up for the people who don't have a voice?
Yes.
Well, that sticking up for life in the womb is part of that for me.
And I understand that. I understand that viewpoint. I mean, and I understand that viewpoint from a lot of different religious faiths. But I also understand the viewpoint of women that are coming to us and saying, this isn't very respectful of motherhood to not let us make this decision.
I think we do a lot of things that are not necessarily respectful of motherhood. I think we do a lot of things that are not very respectful of the family.
It's an important job.
Yeah.
And so,
yes, it is.
And so to be able to plan your family, family planning, to be able to plan your family is ideal, because it is the most important job that most mothers think that we will do, even those that are working mothers, that have a very important job in their own right, but raising their family and raising the future is so important.
Oh my gosh.
So
Yes.
having that be planned, and having a whole wide range of ways we can plan to be mothers and plan to be parents is really just the ideal.
And supporting those folks when the plan doesn't go according to plan.
Yes, that's
How do
true.
we support folks
There
when the
needs to
plan
be
doesn't
things
go
in
according to
place.
plan?
Right.
Because so much of our energy is spent doing that too.
Right.
It's just saying, okay, I know you didn't, this wasn't the right timing, this wasn't what you thought was happening.
And
Let's help you figure out how to do
legislatively,
it.
that could be reinforced as well. Because when the plan fails and a woman has to make a decision just based on economic stuff, if her state is saying to her, I'm not going to make sure that, we're not going to put a framework in where your kid's going to have health care, where you're going to have health care to deal with this. We're not going to make sure to help with economic job growth, or you to have a fair living wage so that you can support your child. We're not going to put programs into place that are going to help you parent this child that you agree to bring into the world. Then some women are making that decision because of that.
Right, and I'll agree with you on all that. It's just like how we do the planning, how we do the supporting, and all that kind of good stuff. I just want to make sure that I say this.
Planning and the support, we could come together legislatively.
I would hope so. But again, part of the problem is in this zero-sum game that we seem to be playing right now in politics. And it's not as bad in Missouri as we are at the national scene, but it's like, okay.
And we're trying. There are folks that are trying to come together on those things. I promise you, in the state of Missouri.
Well, I know,
We're trying.
and I know in the state of Missouri, like I say, we're not nearly as bad. Fortunately, we not got lost in some of the same games that we have gotten.
We really got caught up on this one issue, and in a lot of ways, a lot of other things didn't pass because this bill was.
Everybody was
hanging
wanting
up
eggs in that basket.
The process, but we were trying to work together on a wide range of other things, and I hope we can come back to them next session.
I just want to go.
Because, we feel like the courts are probably that our Missouri courts are probably going to put a stay on this particular bill. So once that's done, perhaps we'll be able to come back to talking about the other issues, and I hope so. I will certainly, and our organization will certainly continue to go back and talk to our area legislators about it, and go up to Jefferson City and talk about it. And I hope the Republicans, and we think that some of our Republicans that live in this area are going to want to work with us on those issues.
Yeah, and again, like I say, I know my own bishops, my own bishop and the bishops of the state of Missouri came down saying that they approved of the bill because right now in this zero-sum game, they feel like they had to do something to continue to advance our safeguarding and respect for life, and that was where they were doing it. I'm not always sure that it was the best. I'm not always sure the best strategy, but I certainly understand where they were coming from and what they were trying to aim for. And I think that there's a sad reality in that is that even in challenging the way that Roe v. Wade was set up.
Right.
it's almost a zero-sum game because, you know.
And we, you know, on that, we may never be able to find that common ground. But what I would say is even if we can't, even if we're always going to disagree on that, go back and ask the bishops, will they work with us on some of the other things? Because, you know, our organization will, and we want to.
Right.
And a lot of Democrats want to work on, we're going to have this one thing that where, you know, we've always kind of said, like, you never know who your ally is going to be on something else.
Right.
So just because you disagree on one thing, don't burn a bridge.
Yeah, and we're in that situation where it's just like, okay, when it comes to sex ed, we're out there and we say, yes, we want to do this, but we want it done, you know, with respect and all those kinds of things. But we want it done.
Right.
Let's not talk about it, or
Right.
let's only, you know, just pray your way through all of it. And it's
Right.
like, no, let's do the education.
Well, and we want to assess those things to be science-based too, because some of the sex ed that we're doing right now has scientific outcomes that are an increased number of pregnancies. You know, we don't want that.
I think we're blessed here in our area in Southwest Missouri. You know, we do have so many differing opinions, but for the most part, at least right here in the greater Joplin area, I think we've actually got some pretty good models of working together.
We do. We can come together and work together.
You know,
on things.
when Life Choices and you know, and Planned Parenthood can kind of, you know, once in a while find some common ground and do their thing, let's do it. So how do we do all that? We've run out of time. 2 weeks. God bless you. Join us next week.
Dreaded tagged photo. I married the love of my life in October, and when I got home that night, I saw this. Frankly, this is every obese person's worst nightmare. You have no control, none, over what other people post. And up until that day, I'd been very careful about how I presented myself on social media. In fact, I generally only posted photos like this. What's sad is that I haven't always been like this. Confession, I've been a yo-yo dieter for roughly 10 years. When I met this amazing guy 3 years ago, he didn't care how much I weighed, but he did care about my health. A month after our wedding, I talked to my doctor and my journey began. Here's an honest and usually pretty entertaining look at how I got to bariatric surgery and beyond. Buckle up, check out my blog, Confessions of a Yo-Yo Dieter.
We get so wrapped up in the conversation that I forgot I even got to do a wrap up for the end of the show. I was just like thinking, oh my gosh, we're done, we're out of time, and we got to go. So I just want to say thank you for last week and this week. I know these conversations sometimes can be very difficult to listen to, and even harder sometimes to get ourselves in. But we got to talk about the things that matter to us. And whether I'm talking to Krista Stark, who is the executive director of Southwest Missouri Democrats, who I may still wind up with some disagreements on in terms of strategy, the important thing is that we found out that we actually do want to do some things to help our people here in the state of Missouri. We want to help our moms. We want to help our people who wind up in difficult situations. We want to help people who are having difficulty with pregnancies. We want to help them to figure out how to do all those things. And how do we do the greatest amount of good and the least amount of harm? We may have different opinions on how we deal with all that, but the best thing is we can do it as common people of goodwill together. Let's search for that with each other. Thanks, God bless, and come back and see us again next week.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.